Welcome everyone to today's webinar, A Day in the Life of an Agile Team. This webinar is one in a series of monthly webinars on various project management, Agile, and business analysis related topics presented by Procept Associates Limited. I'm your presenter, Kevin Aguanno. I've been in the Agile community for many years. I've been teaching Agile methods since the mid-90s, and I'm one of the pioneers in the field. In fact, I was one of the first to present the concepts of Agile project management back around late 2001. I've got lots of Agile and traditional project management certifications, have written lots of books, teach Agile at the university level, and work actively as an Agile consultant, helping some of the largest organizations create governance models that best fit Agile and traditional delivery, as well as help them develop their methodologies and coach them through the adoption of Agile onto some of their largest, most strategic projects. Today, I'm going to talk with you about what does a typical day look like for an Agile team. Specifically, I'm going to talk about how Agile has three kinds of plans. And one of those types of plannings is planning on a daily basis. We're going to talk about day planning. And we're going to look at what the typical last day, first day, and middle day of an iteration looks like. Certain activities have to take place on each of these days. The last day, we have to demonstrate our work in progress to get feedback. On the first day, we have to plan the upcoming iteration. And on typical middle days in the iteration, we have to build some stuff and test it and get it ready for the demo. So we're going to talk about what those days look like typically, and how those practices of Agile planning and estimating and execution and how they all come together in a typical project. So first, I'm going to talk about the three different types of Agile plans. Agile, interestingly enough, has more hours of planning in it than a typical waterfall or a comparable waterfall project. So if we did the same project two different ways, waterfall versus Agile, we would find that the waterfall project would actually have less planning in it than the Agile project, which is surprising to some people because waterfall is a plan-driven process. But we build the plan once at the beginning and spend the rest of the project trying to stick to the plan. Whereas in Agile, we get started more quickly. There is some formality, there is planning involved, but then we adjust and replan and tweak and adjust the plan and replan consistently as we move through the project. In fact, in the Agile Manifesto, the document that describes the Agile philosophy best, perhaps, the very last of the four key items basically says, don't stick to the plan, adjust the plan, adapt the plan to the observed changes. So the plan is constantly being tweaked and adjusted so we have the latest available information from which to make further decisions. So Agile is not a planless approach. In fact, what I'm teaching is what's called the disciplined structured approach to Agile, which is very much focused on planning and estimating and setting realistic stakeholder expectations, but all in a high change environment. So that's the bias in what I will be presenting to you today. As I said, Agile teams have three levels of planning. There's the release plan. That's a high level project schedule, essentially. It identifies the start and end date of the project, the start and end date of each iteration, the key interlocks, dependencies with other projects, key deliverables that have to be done by certain dates. We assign the deliverables to iterations, so we can see the contents of each iteration. We can answer the question, what gets done by when, what and when. So it helps us identify the timing of the deliverables, which is key for business and planning because they need to know when deliverables will be completed because there may be other projects dependent on those deliverables. And then lastly, aside from the timing of the deliverables, we also identify low productivity periods, change freezes, blackout windows, things like that may affect the scheduling of the work as well. So that's a release plan. We're going to talk more about that in another webinar. So we have the release plan. That's the high-level project plan, and it is what is used to communicate between the team and the business. So we can set expectations with the business stakeholders. It contains all they need to know, what gets done by when. Now, at the team level, we have something called an iteration plan. The iteration plan is a detailed project schedule, but not for the entire project, just for the upcoming few weeks, for the upcoming iteration. It's prepared on the first day of each iteration to describe what's going to be done, the tasks, the task owners, how we're going to attack it, how we're going to solve or complete a piece of the work. That's the iteration plan. It identifies how and who. So the release plan is what gets done by when, and the iteration plan is how are we going to do that and who's going to do it. So it is a traditional project type plan. It's a work breakdown structure, identify all the tasks, estimate the tasks in hours, build a little Gantt chart. If that really excites you, you can. But Agile doesn't require you to build a Gantt chart. It says you need a plan, but it doesn't identify what that plan looks like. So it's up to the team to scale the planning artifact to meet their own individual coordination challenges or needs. So a team that has 4 people and you're working on a 2-week iteration may only have 20 tasks to get done over 2 weeks. You may not need a Gantt chart. Maybe just a checklist is fine, or Post-it notes moving across a whiteboard or something like that. But for a larger team, maybe you have 60 people working over a 6-week iteration, you may find there's a lot of complex interdependencies within those within the relationships of those tasks. You may want to do a Gantt chart to help coordinate, to make sure there's nothing missed, there's no handoffs that get dropped. So we leave it up to the team to choose how they build the plan, but the idea is the iteration plan identifies how we're going to complete the work, who's going to do the pieces of work. And that's an inward team-focused plan. That's more information than the business typically needs to know. That's just a team-driven plan. And then we have, on a daily basis, something called a day plan. And the day plans are informal arrangements for the team, among the team members. Often these day plans are not written down. They're just verbally described, but it describes who's doing what on a daily basis. This presentation talks about day plans specifically. How do you build day plans, and what does a typical day plan look like for an Agile team? Now, day planning is an activity that's, I said, often done verbally, informally, but there is a bit of a more formal plan for some days of the iteration. And what we're going to find is that day plans differ very much based on your industry. For example, a software development project will look very different than the day plan for a construction project. They'll vary by company, because different companies have certain standards or policies about what activities have to get done and how we do the dates. They may have set standards based on iteration length, or when iterations can start and end. It may vary by project type. Projects to build something new are going to look very different from projects that are just focused on doing service enhancements or updates or bug fixes to an existing product or service. And also the preferred style of the team. Some teams, are there full days, so they can have their team meeting for their daily kickoff meeting first thing in the morning. Other teams may have people who are job sharing or have flexible work hours because of childcare arrangements. So they may not have some team members coming in until 11 or 12 o'clock and staying later in the evening. So that may affect the timing of the daily team meetings and things like that. So the day plan will vary based on company, industry, the type of the project, and the team itself. So when I present you a sample day plan, what I'm showing you is an example of how it could work, not how it should work, or not how it will look for your company. I'm not trying to be prescriptive. What I'm giving you is just an illustration of how a day plan can come together, but you need to find the procedures and timings and things that work for your project in your industry, your project type, under the rules of your team. Now, day plans, I said, are verbal and are informal. However, we can prepare some schedules for what some day plans look like. For example, the first and last day of an iteration have more structure. There's more specific activities that have to take place. Business stakeholders are involved in the demos and the planning activities, and it's hard to get some of their attention. We may find that we have to book meetings well in advance to get things on their agenda. So we reserve meeting rooms and reserve time on their calendars. So we need to be a little bit more formal with the planning of the first and last days of an iteration. Also, we need templates to make sure that we do all the right activities, make sure we don't miss anything important. But a template isn't cast in stone. It's just a suggestion. We always adapt it to the changes as they arise and to the specific circumstances, so they can be modified as needed. So the first and last day templates are a little bit more formal, but the templates for the middle days are much more flexible. During the initial project planning, we have to prepare the day plan templates for the first and last days and get team buy-in and make sure that the meetings can be booked and get it on people's calendars, and make sure that we can adjust them though based on, as I said, on an iteration by iteration basis as exceptions occur. Timing of meetings may change based on other prior engagements that the team has booked. Demos may get pushed out if there are holidays or long weekends involved. So we have to adjust the day plans to affect the reality of individual iterations. The team is involved in building the day plans, not just the PM. The whole team gets actively involved. It may be helpful if business stakeholders, at least the sponsors involved, just to confirm the demos, but they don't need to be involved in figuring out the day planning of individual days or even preparing some of those templates. It may distract the team. The project manager sets up the iteration plan, which includes all the daily Scrum meetings, figures out the start and end dates of the iterations, and then that affects the descriptions of what those day plans look like for those key first and last dates and typical middle days. Other team members are actually involved in doing the work and adjusting the day plans on a daily basis during the iteration, but the Scrum Master project manager largely sets up the templates for the day plans with input from the team. So let's look at what a typical day plan looks like. Now, the day plans, as I said, are more formal for the first and last day of the iteration. And I'm going to begin describing the last day first. What does a typical last day of an iteration looks like? Well, there's certain activities we need to complete. We know we're going to be doing a demo with our sponsor and stakeholders, so we need to get ready and prepare for that demo. So there's going to be certain activities we're going to have to do: clean up our deliverables, polish them up, get them ready, maybe do a dry run to make sure that we've got everything we need to have a successful demo. We're going to do the demo, we're going to capture feedback, do some lessons learned, and get ready for the new iteration that'll be starting next. Certain outputs come out of that meeting. Obviously, there may be feedback which may lead to new features or stories that need to get added to our backlog. We'll have to update the backlog, reprioritize it with these new items. And there will be lessons learned that we'll have to write down along with some other items. So there are certain activities that have to take place on the last day. I'm going to show you now the day plan for a last day of an iteration. This day plan is very specific to a software development project. Agile is a lot bigger than just software development. It's used in construction and business transformations and organizational mergers and engineering projects. All kinds of different projects around the world are using Agile, not just software development, but because it's most commonly used in the software world. I'm going to use a software development example. So in a software development project, on a typical last day, it might look like this. Say our day runs from 9 to 5. That's our typical work day. We would first start with our daily Scrum meeting, our daily team meeting. Now, we don't hold that first thing in the morning simply because, people will often miss the meeting. They're coming in late. There was delays on the public transport, or they couldn't find parking. Give people a chance to get into the office, take off their coat, check their email, grab a coffee, and still make it to your meeting on time. So I might hold my daily Scrum meeting at, say, 9:30 or 9:45, something like that. Give people a chance to get in. Now, that daily Scrum meeting is that 15-minute team meeting, sometimes called daily stand-up meetings. This is something we borrow from the Scrum methodology. During these daily Scrum meetings, the core team members, the people doing the work, designing, building, and testing and completing the deliverables, plus the project manager or Scrum Master are present. No business stakeholders. The product owner in Scrum usually is not present because it's not, it changes the nature of the meeting. They don't have anything to add to a daily Scrum meeting. So it's typically the core team and the PM or Scrum Master get together. And 3 questions are asked of each team member. One from the past, one from the present, one from the future. The question from the past is, were there any problems completing your work yesterday? Traditionally, people say this question is, what did you get done yesterday? But that's not the best question, because if you're holding this meeting every day, you should already know what they were working on yesterday, because at yesterday's Scrum meeting, they described what they would be working on the current day. So the next day, 24 hours later, you should remember what they had said the day before. So saying, what did you work yesterday? Not so good. What did you complete yesterday? Maybe a bit better, but I think the best question is, were there any issues completing your work yesterday? This is daily issue identification. So the team members can ask each other for help. It gives them a formal process by which they can collaborate, they can share knowledge, they can mentor, they can help each other solve problems quickly before they fester and get worse. It's a matter of being efficient and removing waste. So first question, were there any problems completing your work yesterday? The second question, the question about the present, what are you working on today? That is so that team members can be aware of what each other are doing, because it may impact their own individual work. You may hear comments like, oh, you're doing that? Well, that may impact what I'm doing. Why don't you and I stay behind after this meeting for a couple minutes and talk it through to make sure that we're working in a coordinated fashion? Or, hey, I've always wanted to learn how to do that. Can I watch? Now, two people will understand how to do that piece of work. So it's an opportunity to knowledge transfer, collaborate, share, build capacity, but also to coordinate the work to avoid problems in the first place, right? By understanding who's working on what. The third question, the question about the future, and no, it's not what are you going to work on tomorrow. The future question is, are there any barriers or any problems that you foresee that might impact our commitments? Or to put it another way, can you identify any new risks? That first question, are there any problems completing your work yesterday? That's daily issue identification. This third question about the future, do you see any new risks, is daily risk identification. Agile is so focused on risk reduction, we have a formal structured process that we execute on a daily basis to identify and take action on new risks. So those are the three questions in the daily stand-up meeting. It's really important that the project manager or the scrum master doesn't allow side discussions, because this 15-minute meeting will go on and end up taking an hour if you allow people to start solving problems in the meeting. So very specifically, the facilitator of this meeting should ask those three questions. And if two people go off and start chatting about the answer to one of those questions, the facilitator needs to step in and say, whoa, hold on a second. Only you two people really are interested in that answer right now. Can we table that discussion till after the rest of us have answered our three questions? The rest of us can go back to our desks, go sit down and get some work done while you guys stay behind and chat about someone's answer to one of those questions all you want, but it doesn't need to involve the whole group. So in the interest of efficiency, the facilitator needs to be very crisp in controlling those side discussions. One of the things we say is these meetings need to be 10 to 15 minutes, no longer, because otherwise you're impacting people's productivity for the day. People feel that the time is being wasted sitting around listening to other people talk about stuff that doesn't have anything to do with them. So you get less engagement in the meetings. So it's very important that you keep the meetings short and crisp. So so after the 10 minutes, 15 minutes, everybody goes back to their desks and gets back to work. The few people that were staying behind to discuss things do so, and they have their follow-up discussions. And those follow-up discussions may take a few minutes, or they may range into a couple of hours if there's deep technical issues they're trying to resolve. After the follow-up discussions, we have a demo to prepare for today. So the next step is to clean up your deliverables and get ready for the demo. Now, if this is a software development project, cleanup and preparation may include removing your test harnesses, turning off your debug flags, porting your code or moving it over from the development environment into the QA or demo environment, getting it ready for the demo, moving in some demo data, so you've got good, clean demo data, not corrupt data that was created during development or testing. Make sure it all works in that demo environment. Do a dry run if you have to. And that takes us to the next step. Rehearse the demo. Don't just blindly do the demo from the top without rehearsing it. Walk it through. Make it look swift. Make it look clean. Make it look professional. You don't want to hear words like, well, it worked in dev, while people are trying to do a demo in a new environment. So do a dry run. Script it if you have to. Make sure all the IDs and permissions are set up. Make sure you have an organized, structured way of running the demo so it runs nice and clean. So that's the rehearsing the demo. Once the demo is clean and working and looking good, then do the demo. Your business stakeholders will come in and they'll sit through the demo. Now, it's very important that we don't demo everything. Just focus on a few key items. If you're not demoing everything, just those few key items, then you'll find the demos are very short, 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour maximum. They shouldn't be much longer than that. So how do you know which items to demo? Well, it really comes down to three key things. There's three things that we demo. First, demo something if you have to get feedback, if you need the feedback, right? If you don't know if something's right or not, do the demo and ask, is this right? Is this what you had in mind? Are we on the same page? Because the whole point of a demo is to capture feedback. So do the demo, and if you need the feedback. Next, demo something if the business asked you to. The business sponsor or stakeholder may have been demoed this item before in the past, but maybe they're still having a hard time getting their head wrapped around the problem, or they're not sure how they're going to approach it, or there's an idea for a change bouncing around in the back of their head, and if they saw it one more time, it may help them formulate their new request. Or maybe they're going to bring a stakeholder with them. The sponsor saw it, but realizes this may impact another stakeholder, brings them to the demo and wants you to demo it again to show the new stakeholder what you're working on. So by all means, if the business asks you to demo something, demo it again. And the only third thing that we demo, the last thing that we demo of the three, is something that's just so cool that you need to show off a little bit for a couple of reasons. One is to boost morale. By showing off the art of the possible, what the team's capable of, it may boost morale. The sponsor might say, oh my gosh, that's incredible. Way to go, team, right? And builds team morale. But it also stretches the sponsor's thinking about what the art of the possible is. The sponsor might see, you might demo something so amazing, the sponsor might say, oh my gosh, you can do that? I didn't even realize that was possible. Wow, that's a game changer. If you can do that, that may change how I formulate the rest of my requirements because my vision of what I need just shifted. So we demo three things. Demo it if you need the feedback, demo it if the business asked you to, and demo something that's really amazing, cool, you want to show off a little bit, because that may stretch the thinking of the sponsor and help create a better product overall. So we do the demo. Now, coming out of the demo will be feedback. That feedback likely will lead to new items on the project backlog. Now, the business only shows up for the demo. I said the demo was 20 to 30 minutes or so. Right on the heels of the demo, while everybody's there, do your lessons learned. In Agile, a lessons learned is called a retrospective. Do your retrospective right on the heels of the demo. Now, why? Because your business stakeholders are there and they may have some lessons learned for you. So we break our retrospective or our lessons learned activity into two parts. The first part is the business lessons learned. And your sponsor is there and you ask the business stakeholders or the sponsor three key questions, right? One, what did we get right? What did you like about how we approached this that we can continue working that way successfully in the future? Right? They'd love to tell you what worked. Everybody likes to acknowledge what they did well. Secondly, how could we further improve? If we were to do this again in the future, hindsight's 2020, how could we have made it even better? Right? So those are lessons learned for the future. And the third type of lessons learned is where did we screw up? Why did we, what mistakes did we make that we should avoid repeating in the future? And it's this third type of lessons learned, acknowledging the mistakes that the team made, which is perhaps the most important lesson learned of all. And if you don't get this right, if you don't acknowledge your mistakes, you're doomed to repeat them in the future, and that leads to all kinds of inefficiencies. So these are sometimes the most important ones. And I think it's imperative that we ask the business to give us lessons learned because they may have some suggestions for us. Like, next time you work with those stakeholders to gather requirements, make sure you notify this manager 2 weeks in advance. These are some of the lessons learned that you may get from your sponsor. So that's the business lessons learned. It should only take about 5, 10, 15 minutes maximum. So we're talking about needing the business for anywhere between, say, 25, 30 minutes up to maybe 45 minutes on the last day of the iteration to do the demo, to do the lessons learned, and then get out. Because right on the heels of the business lessons learned, we start the technical lessons learned with the core team members. Now, in the technical lessons learned, we dive deep. So when we're talking about what we did well and what mistakes did we make and how can we further improve things, we're diving deep into our processes and into our technological solution. And this is stuff that's going to go way over the heads of the business stakeholders. So I asked them to leave the room before we start the technical lessons learned, partly to give them back part of their day, partly because they're not going to understand most of these technical lessons learned, but also remember the third type of lessons learned, that third question, what mistakes did we make? If our sponsor, our business stakeholders, our client is in the room, magically there's going to be no mistakes that anybody will admit to because they don't want to, embarrass themselves in front of the client. And sometimes, as I said, those are the most important lessons learned of all. So I tell the sponsor stakeholders to please leave the room before we do the technical lessons learned. If they really want to know what's going on, I'll circle back with them at the end of the day and share with them the key highlights. And it gives me a chance to possibly reword things in a more sensitive way before I share them with the business. So that's the lessons learned, the retrospective. So we do the demo, we do the business lessons learned, the business stakeholders leave, and then we do the technical lessons learned. And coming out of those lessons learned activities, those retrospectives, may be more items to add to the project backlog, such as refactoring opportunities. We can acknowledge how many points of work or what our velocity was that we were able to achieve during the iteration, and that will lead to a recalibration of the release plan so that we bite off the appropriate amount of work next iteration. And we may even come up with some new ideas for tasks or the approach that we're going to use in completing the deliverables that may be innovative, that may help us improve performance and productivity, that we can incorporate next iteration when we build the iteration plan for the upcoming iteration. Once the retrospective is done, we formally acknowledge the end of the iteration. At this point, the iteration is formally closed. But there may still be some project-related work we can do after this. For example, we could catch up on email, filling in our timesheets, things that got pushed aside in the rush to get the deliverables done. But in addition, now that we've added new items out of the retrospective to the project backlog, we can do some backlog maintenance. We may do some estimating, reprioritization of items on the backlog. We may archive our source code, what we just demonstrated, take a snapshot of it, make a copy of it, because we're going to start changing it tomorrow. In the next, in the start of the next iteration, we're already going to start changing it to incorporate yet additional deliverables or features. And that may break it for a while until those new features are completed. It might not be demonstratable. But what happens if the business comes back to us in a couple of days and says, hey, can you show me that thing again? If we don't have an archive of it, it may not be demonstratable. We may be blocked. So we say take a snapshot of it, take a copy of it, and store it away somewhere as the last demonstrated version. So if we need to demonstrate it again mid-iteration, we can. Depending on how you're managing your source code, you may want to start a new code branch. Reset your environments, move the code back into the development environment, turn on your test harnesses and your debug flags, and get clean data in there for testing and development again. Get all that set up so you can start the new iteration fresh, and go home at the end of the day as per normal. That's the typical last day of an iteration. Now, notice on the right, all those red items. Those are items that come out of the typical work of the last day. These are updating the backlog, doing your release planning, backlog maintenance. All these activities actually feed into the starting day of the next iteration. So let's talk about what the first day of an iteration looks like. Now, as per the last day, there's certain items that have to get done on the first day. We got to confirm our scope. We got to talk through the design of what we need to build next, prepare our estimates and a plan for the new iteration, and start getting some of the work done. So what does this look like? Well, again, assuming we start from 9 to 5, we'll come in at 9 and leave at 5. The first thing we do in the day is not a daily Scrum meeting. We don't do a daily Scrum meeting on the first day of an iteration, partly because the information's irrelevant. On the first day of an iteration, we ask those 3 questions in the daily Scrum meeting. What did you get done yesterday? Or were there any problems completing your work yesterday? The answer is going to be, I don't know. I was at the cottage, right? I didn't get all my work done. There was no project work assigned. It was maybe a weekend. We haven't started the iteration yet. So there is nothing relevant to ask on that first day. What are you going to work on today? They'll say, I don't know. You haven't told me yet, right? So it's not a useful meeting on day one. So instead of doing the daily Scrum meeting, if you didn't do backlog maintenance in the afternoon of the last day of the iteration after the retrospective, if you didn't do backlog maintenance then, now's your last chance to because backlog maintenance reprioritizes the list of incompleted deliverables. If we can reprioritize that list, we can identify what things need to be done next. And that helps us identify the scope for the new iteration. So backlog maintenance, if you didn't do it Friday afternoon, do it Monday morning, get ready for the new iteration. Update the release plan, reprioritize the list to figure out what are the next few things you're going to be working on. And that is based on the velocity that was observed from last iteration, helps you carve off the appropriate amount of work for this upcoming iteration. Now, the business needs to participate in backlog maintenance and updating the release plan because it involves prioritization, which is a business-driven activity. So your sponsor needs to, or a delegate, or the product owner in Scrum gets involved. While they're there, once we've confirmed the scope for the next iteration, might as well have the business explain the vision for those items to the team so they can hear it in the sponsor or product owner's own words, what's happening next. So they may say, hey, everybody, next iteration, iteration 4, is all about improvement in customer experience. All the deliverables and things that we're working on there are all contributing to improving our customer service. And our customer experience manager is going to be a key business stakeholder involved in this call. Our VP of marketing is all over this. They're going to be attending the demo. This is really high visibility, high importance. We're going to be hitting the top 5 things that are affecting our complaints at the call center. If we can address those right away, we'll see an immediate benefit to the business. This is very strategic, very important. Everybody's all behind it. Rah, 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 go team, go, right? You want to get them all fired up and inspired about how important this iteration is. And that may take 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so. And after that, the sponsor's done. So while I needed them for maybe 30 to 40 minutes on the last day of an iteration, on the first day, I may need them for 15, 20 minutes maximum for updating the release plan and backlog maintenance and explaining the scope or vision. Once the scope for the new iteration has been confirmed, the next step is for the business analysis and architects to explain the design for the new iteration to the team that are going to be building and testing it. This is using a technique called Agile fast tracking, where the requirements analysis and design activities happen one iteration in advance of the build. So if that's all happening nice and smoothly, then the requirements and design for this iteration's work were done last iteration. So those BAs and architects can explain to the developers and testers this iteration what they're being asked to build. This is really important because I don't want anybody planning how to do work that they don't understand yet. So once people fully understand the activities that they're being asked to do, then we ask them to build the plan on how to do them. So iteration planning happens next. It's typically a short activity. We're not planning the whole project. We're just planning, the next few weeks worth of work. Do a work breakdown structure, estimated in hours, build a little plan. And that shouldn't take more than maybe half an hour or so with the team because we're not planning out the whole project, just the next chunk of work. And if they fully understand the design, if they got a full detailed requirements and design walkthrough, then there should be no difficulty in preparing the plan on how they're going to do that work. And both of those activities are affected by the outputs of last iteration. For example, iteration planning is impacted by understanding lessons learned from last iteration on how we could do work even more effectively. After the iteration plan is done, after the iteration plan has been completed and shows that it is possible to build the next 4 features over the next 2 weeks, then we commit. So commitment in Agile is a progressive activity. It doesn't happen all at once. We commit a piece at a time, one iteration at a time. And the commitment happens after the iteration plan is built that proves that it's possible with a detailed bottoms-up, old-fashioned plan that proves that it's possible to build the next, say, 3 or 4 features in the next couple weeks. So only after we have a detailed bottoms-up, hours-based plan, supported by a work breakdown structure and everything, that shows that it's possible to get the work done with this team, that's when we commit. Once we've committed, then go get some work done. Start building the new features, right? The requirements and design have already been walked through. They've already been explained. So start building new code, writing new code. The testers can start creating test cases. Everybody can get some work done. What do the BAs and architects do? Well, then they can start working ahead on next iteration's scope to figure out what are the requirements and design elements for that. So that's what a typical first day of an iteration looks like. It takes the outputs of the last day and uses them as input into the new iteration. And this updating the release plan and explaining the vision and design and iteration planning with a team who really knows what they're doing and are very focused, and short iterations, like say maybe 2 weeks in length, that iteration planning startup work might only take an hour or 2 in the morning. Certainly before lunch, we're already starting to build new features. This does not need to take a long time in getting this first day set up. So what does a typical middle day of an iteration look like? Remember I said there's first day, last day, and middle day templates. Well, a typical middle day is a day in which we're going to get some stuff done. Now, early days in the iteration, there's no testing going on because you're still building stuff. In later days in the iteration, there should be not much new building going on. You should be primarily tweaking, adjusting, testing, fixing defects, getting things polished up and ready for the demo. So the percentage of build versus fix changes as we move through the iteration on a daily basis. But in a typical middle day might look like this. We got to do our daily Scrum meeting. We got to fix defects. We're working on scope. We're doing some testing. How does that look? Well, say we come in from 9 to 5. I don't do my daily Scrum meeting at 9. I may wait till 9:30, 9:45, something like that. Give people a chance to come in, check email, grab a coffee. We do our daily Scrum meeting. And as I said, we facilitate it crisply, keep it short, 10, 15 minutes. Any leftover discussions that can't fit in there, people stay behind for follow-up discussions as necessary. Then once the follow-up discussions are done, fix defects before you build new features. Why do I do it that way? Well, I'm not just fixing any defects. I'm actually focusing on fixing high priority defects or blocker defects in the morning. Right after the daily Scrum meeting, first fix blocker defects. Anything that's blocking somebody from getting their work done, because we're trying to avoid inefficiencies. I don't want anybody idle. So if somebody's being blocked by a defect of some kind, fix that first. And then once the defects are fixed, go build new features. Obviously, if there's no blockers, just build new features all day. But what happens if a blocker is taking up your whole day? Well, I would suggest if you haven't fixed your blocker defects by, say, lunchtime or so, stop, take a break, go have lunch, pray, go for a walk, go to a yoga class, whatever you do for your break. When you come back, don't continue working on the blockers, because if you continue working on the blockers, you're just going to get more and more frustrated and burned out, and you're not very likely to solve the problem later that afternoon. You're just going to get too mentally fatigued. You're going to go home at the end of the day angry, frustrated, thinking, what a waste of my day. You'll yell at your kids, you'll hit your dog, you'll just be a miserable person that evening. Far better if when you stop at lunch and take a break, you come back and you say, you know what, I still haven't fixed those defects, but I'm going to put them aside. I'm just going to work on some new deliverables and get something done today. At the end of the day, you're going to feel productive. You're going to feel like you got something done. And indeed, we do want to get the features built as quickly as we can so we can get them in the hands of the testers to start testing them. So it is important to focus on getting those deliverables built as quickly as you can. So I would say stop at lunch, and when you come back after lunch, work on new features, even if your deliverables, even if your defects aren't done yet. You'll go home at the end of the day feeling somewhat productive. You thought the morning was a write-off, but at least I got something done in the afternoon. You'll go home, hug your kids, pet your dog, have a great night's sleep. The next morning when we come in for our daily Scrum meeting, the first question we ask is, were there any problems completing your work yesterday? And if the answer is, yeah, I had a problem, you can share the problem right away, and somebody sitting right beside you might know the answer, and problem will get solved instantly. Even if they can't, the next question, what are you going to work on today? And you say, I'm going to continue working on that high priority block or defect. Well, the second day when you tackle that problem, you're far more likely going to be able to solve it than you did if you'd continued struggling through the afternoon of the first day. Why? Well, because when you come back the next morning, you're mentally relaxed. You're not frustrated and burned out. You're relaxed. You got your full faculties. You're not burned out. Plus, your subconscious has been working on that problem all yesterday afternoon, all night long. So when you come back to it the second morning, you're far more likely going to be able to solve it the second day than if you'd continue trying to struggle through the first day. So I suggest that people, when they take a break for lunch, when they come back, start on some new work. Now, obviously, if you're in the middle of eating lunch and you have a eureka moment and you say, oh my gosh, I just figured it out, I know the problem, don't wait till the next day. Go back and fix it right away if that's the case, before you forget, that brilliant insight that you'd attained. Certainly, by some point, by maybe lunchtime or after lunch, you come back, you're working on new things in the afternoon. Now, for a software development project, I have a specific rule. I tell my team members at 4 o'clock, it doesn't matter whether they're done their deliverables, writing their code or not, at 4 o'clock, everybody checks in their source code and we do what's called our daily build. What's that all about? Well, automated builds are very easy and efficient to do these days. The tools are really great. And a build can actually test whether people are following standards. Some of the build tools can test conformance to coding standards. For example, they might say, this particular method in your code is more than 5,000 lines long. That's too complex. We need to simplify it. You're not freeing up memory space. You're allocating. There's things that the build tools can look for to spot errors. In fact, some of the build tools are free, really good ones that are out there in the open source market, but some of them can actually do a build and actually run some automated test cases, sometimes called smoke tests, to see if the system shakes down properly. If the build actually created a functioning system, it'll run through some automated test cases to make sure still the system kind of sort of works with some of its key capabilities. So why do we care? Because if you do a daily check-in at build at say 4 o'clock, it might take 10 minutes for the system to build, to assemble all the components together and build and get a clean build and even run a few test cases to prove that it's a clean build. Then we can walk away, flip a switch, and overnight the system can run automated test cases doing automated regression testing all night long. So that's an interesting feature. First thing people do with those automated test cases is overnight the tests will run, the automated tests will run, and the team will get emailed a list of new defects that have been discovered during the last night's test run. Remember I said everybody comes into the morning to check their email before they go to the daily scrum? What they're checking for is the emails from last night's test run to see if there are any new block or defects, so that when they're in the daily scrum meeting in the morning, they can choose the appropriate ones. So there's a bit of email checking and maybe triaging of last night's defects so that we have that information ready before we come into the daily scrum meeting in the morning. The other thing that people do at the end of the day is update the PM on the hours remaining on the tasks that they worked on today. So they say, my task is done. There's 0 hours left. That's fine. Or they might say, my task is nearly done, but there's still 10 hours left. They take the number of hours remaining, email that to the PM. And it's not an onerous email. Most people aren't working on more than 3 or 4 things in a day. So it's an email to the PM with 3 or 4 tasks listed on it and the number of hours remaining in bullet point form. That gets emailed to the PM. So in the morning of the next day, just before we do our daily scrum meeting, while everybody else is checking their email for to do a defect triage, the PM checks their email to gather the updated task estimates so they can plug them into their spreadsheet to build their updated iteration or sprint burn down chart. So that sprint or iteration burn down chart aggregates the total number of hours of work remaining for this iteration and burns it down over time. So the PM gets that data every morning, plugs it into the spreadsheet, generates the updated burn down sheet. So I can come to the daily scrum meeting with that graph ready. So when I ask the third daily scrum meeting question, Are there any new risks? Anything going to prevent us from meeting our commitments? If the team says no, I can point to the chart and say, that's not what the data is saying. Think again. This gives us another point of reference to calibrate our answers. So that's what typical day plan looks like for a software development project. These things still happen in other industries, other types of projects. For example, in a construction project, say we're doing an industrial construction project or a commercial construction project, we still do daily Scrum meetings. They're not called that, but there's the daily meeting in the morning when the coffee truck comes by and honks his horn and all the workmen come down off the scaffolding and all walk out to the coffee truck to buy their coffee and donut. While they're all sitting around, the electricians will hang out with each other, the plumbers will hang out with each other. There's not a lot of mixing going on, but you will see the foreman or lead from each of those groups get together, and they're standing off to the side, and the lead electrician and the lead plumber and the lead HVAC guy will all get together and have a quick discussion. And they'll ask those same three questions. Hey, what are you guys working on? Are there any problems getting your work done yesterday? Yeah, we had this issue where so-and-so couldn't get access to the third floor because all your equipment was blocking the stairwell. They'll say, oh my gosh, sorry about that. We'll move it first thing so you won't have a problem today. Great. Second question, what are you working on today? Somebody says, well, I'm going to be up on the 18th floor doing some work. And somebody says, oh, I'll move my guys to a different floor so that, we're not interfering with each other. Are there any new risks? And somebody says, well, yeah, I got a delivery supposed to come in, but you guys have all your material in the way. I have nowhere to put it. That's going to slow us down. They might send the shipment back. So somebody can offer to move material and make a space to store the delivery. So they get together on a daily basis around the coffee truck and just have their daily Scrum meeting in that format. So these types of activities still take place in other industries, but the timing may look a little bit different when they do them during the day. The nature of them may change slightly, but this is just a general idea of how different Agile practices around iteration planning, doing the daily Scrum meetings, gathering some metrics and reforecasting the project, how those can all come together on a daily basis. So just to wrap up a few key points. Day plans are an important part of how we plan Agile projects. We have the release plans, which is my high-level project schedule. And then at the start of each iteration, we build a unique iteration plan for that iteration. Those two together is combined to form a technique called rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning says we have a high-level plan, that's my release plan, and then we do detailed planning just in time at the start of each cycle, phase, wave, or iteration or sprint. Those are my iteration plans. So that's all part of rolling wave planning, release and iteration plans. But we also have these day plans that are more formal for the first day of an iteration and a bit more informal on middle days of the iteration. Day plans, as I said, are very different between different project types. And we want to point out that while the first and last day plans are more project management driven because there's certain activities that have to take place, to get them on the stakeholders' calendars and coordinate everybody's schedules, the typical middle day of a project is a very team-based day plan. They decide on a daily basis how they're going to tackle their work. So if you have any questions on this, I'm willing to take them now, or you can email me your questions if you don't want to ask them right now, or if you're viewing this presentation online and you have questions, you can email me at Aguanno, Aguanno @procept.com, Procept.com, Aguanno @procept.com. Feel free to email me at any time, and I'll try and answer your questions as we go. So right now, we have some people online. Just raise your hand. You can click the little interface to raise your hand if you have a question, or you can type it ideally into the little chat window or the questions window. There's a little window on your user interface where you can type questions. If you have any, please type them in there, and I'll answer them. Okay, there's a question from Bob. He says, can we do these Scrum meetings on waterfall projects? The answer is absolutely yes. Of course you can. A waterfall project is really just a really, really long iteration. So if you have you can hold daily Scrum meetings in a waterfall project just to get together every day with your team to coordinate and manage the work for the day. It doesn't have to be called a Scrum meeting. You can just call it your daily kickoff or your daily coordination meeting, something like that, to help you plan your work for the upcoming day? Very good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Please enter them into the question window or the chat window. Just enter them at any time, please. Okay, one more question. Oh, that's a comment. Thank you. That's we're just complimenting me on this presentation. Thank you very much. Another question. Can I get a copy of the slides? Absolutely. Just email me at that address and I'll send you a soft copy of the slides. Okay, from a timing perspective, we're coming up. We've been at this for about 52 minutes. I do always try to end these just before the top of the hour, give people a chance to go to their next meeting. No more questions at this time. So thank you very much. I appreciate you working with us to see this presentation. Procept Associates, as I said, runs these presentations every month. We have a free webinar that we run on the first Thursday of the month. Details can be found at www.procept.com. Please look for the topics and the speakers. We try to showcase some of our top trainers and consultants that are available. If you look for help on these specific topics, please contact us. We may have white papers and things we can send you to further illustrate these topics. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. Really appreciate it, and bye for now.